Welcome to The Watcher. I'm your cult leader, Tom Pot, and I just watched episode 4 of Moon Knight, and I also watched episode 3. So yeah, there wasn't, let me explain, there was not a video last week for episode 3. I was travelling. I was actually in England. I was in London, as it happens, and I went to the British Museum. I even looked at the Egyptian stuff. I was looking for Stephen Grant. He wasn't there. Very disappointed, but yeah, that's why there was an episode. By the time I could have got around to recording an episode 3, it would have been late. Like episode 4 would have already been out, so I figured I'll just do a double bill. It'll be a kind of a condensed speed through of episode 3 to get up to date, just for the sake of being comprehensive, and then we'll go into episode 4. But if you do want to just skip ahead to episode 4, there's a time code in the description. But yeah, I mentioned in last video I did that it kind of felt like the show needed to kind of up the stakes a bit, because we're now approaching the middle point. In fact, with these 2 episodes, we are at the exact middle of the show. And I feel like with these 2 episodes, they did. It also kind of felt like this episode, specifically episode 3, the friendly type, it does feel like they kind of kicked it up a notch very, very quickly, kind of out of nowhere. I actually was first like, did I miss an episode here? Because it felt like there was something that had just escalated out of nowhere. But yeah, we start with Layla getting a fake passport made so she can head to Egypt. Mark has gone ahead without her. We get a little bit of backstory on her father a bit throughout this episode, and it's kind of weird doing this episode now knowing what happens in episode 4, because there is a sort of air of, is this going to factor in at all? But we start with Harrow and his followers finding Amit'S tomb. They literally find it straight away. It's very easy, actually. Meanwhile, Mark is running across the rooftops of Egypt, hoping to speak to someone, but basically hoping to find out where they've gone to the tomb and how we can find it. And we get some pretty violent stuff here. One of the more interesting things here is that seemingly one of the men he's fighting has a symbol of Ramatut on the back of his jacket, who is a Kang the Conqueror variant. One of the rare MCU references in this show at all, but there's also a reference to Madripoor in this episode from memory. So yeah, there's minor connections to the MCU. The Kang the Conqueror one is significant. The question was kind of, could Ramatut pop into this? I actually thought he was in episode 4 briefly, but I do feel like it would really be not in keeping with the rest of the show, so we shall see. But yeah, he's fighting these men. One of the biggest talking episodes of this episode comes when they're kind of fighting each other. We see this all from Mark's point of view. At one point he turns to Stephen, and then it turns back into Mark. Stephen seemingly let the men go, and then he turns back into Mark, and Mark's like, hey, wait a minute, I'm getting those guys back. So those guys must be like, what the fuck, you just left us go. But then, more interestingly, he flashes again, loses control of the identity, and when Mark comes back, he's surrounded by dead bodies, and he assumes it to be Stephen, but Stephen insists it wasn't him. So, the question is, who is this? And there's more teases to this in the 4th episode. This seemingly feels like it's the 3rd identity of Mark Spector. So, I mentioned this in the 1st episode I did. Mark is one, Stephen Grant is another, Jake Lockley is the other one, who is a cab driver who keeps his ear to the ground. In the underworld, he's also the most violent of those personas, which would be a good reason to keep him locked away. I also boldly said at one point that we probably won't get him, and that was because I was thinking that these identities are tied to his alter egos, as in Mark is Moon Knight, Stephen is Mr. Knight. Do we have something for Jake Lockley? They said they could possibly make one, so I don't know. I guess it could be possible, but they're doing so much teasing of it now that it seems like it would have to be the case. But either way, Khonshu isn't happy, and he realizes that if he catches the god's attention, he might be able to stop Harrow, so he messes with the sky. He creates a lunar eclipse, and in doing that, the gods get attention, and he's drawn into meet the gods inside the Pyramid of Giza. And he also meets the avatars of the other gods. We meet Yatzil, who is an avatar of Hathor, goddess of music and love. We don't know what their powers are. It'd be kind of cool if they did, like, Moon Knight has a moon suit. Did they have something? Apparently not. Or at least we don't see it. But the other gods in attendance, Horus, Isis, Tefnut, Osiris and Hathor are all in attendance, as mentioned. The avatars become possessed by the gods here. Literally, it's not, Khonshu saying to Mark to do this. Khonshu literally takes over his body to plead his case and warns them what is to come. And the gods warn him right back. They say that if you manipulate this guy again, you'll be imprisoned in stone. But he goes back at the gods saying, like, I was banished because I stuck by humanity when you all abandoned them. And they are saying, well, we know our avatars can do our bidding. We don't need to meddle in human affairs. They can do it for us. They're all in the overvoid, which is, again, probably best. I mean, it's hard to explain the overvoid, but basically it's just like, it's God world. I guess there's also an overvoid in DC. I think they basically just said that because, the Marvel world is kind of getting a bit crowded here. We have Norse gods. We're probably going to have, Greek gods in Thor. We're going to have, we have Eternals. It's like, where are the Egyptian gods fit in? It doesn't matter. They're not a factor. But yeah, it's an easy way of explaining that. As this is all happening, he's basically saying, like, we need to stop Harrow. He's trying to discover the tomb, yada, yada, yada. So they call Harrow before the court. He kind of basically immediately appears. And he was like, are you trying to find the Amit'S tomb? And he's like, no, I was just wandering the desert, which is a pretty weak defense. But they're like, okay. Khonshu is unhinged and angry and tries to attack. But the gods literally just snap him right into place. Harrow hits right back at him and says, like, not only Khonshu was abusing this man like he abused me, and also this man is clearly unwell. Talking about Mark and his identity disorder. So in this moment, the gods decide, instead of speaking to Khonshu, they talk to Mark directly and ask him if he feels he is being abused and if he is being exploited. But at that moment, he continues basically to tell the court that Harrow is evil, and he says that he has done wrong. Harrow says he's done no wrong, and he walks, leaving Mark in the temple with just Yatzil. And she tells him that there is another way of finding Amit's tomb. That a man named Senfu was told the location of the tomb in case the gods needed to find the tomb and show mercy. So Mark finds the sarcophagus. If Mark finds the sarcophagus, he'll find the information that Senfu was buried with and be able to find Amit's tomb. So that's kind of, it feels like there's a lot. Feels like every episode here, it's like, you need to find this MacGuffin. It's like, we need to find the scarab. We need to find Senfu. We need to find the tomb. It's like, it can get a bit redundant. But it does lead to some cool moments along the way. So Mark starts to question the locals. Layla arrives at this moment, and they kind of rush away from Cairo. She says she knows someone that can help them. And we get a kind of a tender moment here where they're on a boat, Mark and Layla, and there's seemingly some people partying and undulating. And he says, I haven't heard that since our wedding. Layla says, you could have told me what you've been going through. What it's like to have all these identities. And he says he had it under control until recently, but he also doesn't say what happened to make them reemerge. So it's interesting. I'm not sure if we'll ever get that kind of information or if it's really necessary, but it's a nice moment between them. And Layla is becoming a far more sympathetic character than what we had initially. I do think this character is growing on me over the last two episodes. But they find someone who can help them, which is Anton Mogart, who in the comics is Midnight Man. He's not a very interesting comics character. He's an art thief by night, and he strikes at midnight. That's why he's Midnight Man. He's played by Gaspard Ulliel, who unfortunately passed away recently, far too young. But you may recognize him from Hannibal Rising, for example. So they pose as a couple to approach him because, of course, he has all these artifacts and things, and they're hoping that he has the tomb of Senfu. So, reading the inscriptions on his sarcophagus, they don't see a location, but Stephen tells Mark that it's because it's coded. And at this moment, Layla goes to distract Mogart while Mark and Stephen talk to try to figure out the tomb. Stephen is not going to tell him the location initially, but he relents, but Mark is then interrupted by the guards. So while he wrangles them, a gun off one of them, they have Layla. So he kind of gives in. Layla has a gun on her. So he's kind of ready to attack, but he sees Layla and he's like, okay, well, you win, I guess. At this moment as well, to make things even more awkward, Harrow has arrived and he offers Anton the scarab. But Harrow mentions that Layla's father's murder, and we get a lot of stuff I could have speculated on here if I had recorded the episode in advance, but we get it kind of confirmed later on. They also say Harrow's very introspective here. He kind of cuts into everyone. He's like, this is your father's murder. This is what happened to your father, and you'll never know the truth unless you blah, blah, blah. But he also says something very cold to Mark. He says, you don't leave Layla in because she will see you as you see yourself, unworthy of love. Damn, that is fucking harsh. But yeah, Khonshu then tells Mark to summon the suit, but he's hesitant. Harrow uses power and staff to destroy the sarcophagus. It was kind of weird. I feel like they just had him hesitate, so he had time to destroy the sarcophagus. And it doesn't matter, he destroyed it anyway. So it was a bit of an odd moment. But Mark is now returned as Moon Knight, and yeah, we get some things here. Something here that I think is responding to a famous meme. There's a meme of Moon Knight where he's like throwing a lot of weapons and it says "random bullshit go" or something. It feels like we got a few moments here where he's just throwing random stuff. I will say, probably the best fight in Moon Knight so far. I don't think there's been a lot of competition, unfortunately, but I do think it was a very good fight, very exciting. And Steven is kind of just being like, you're going too far, Mark, let me take over. And then he becomes Mr. Knight, gets stabbed by spears, and immediately is like, okay, actually, you take over. It's just like a rare bit of comedy in this. Layla, we also see her get involved in the action. She has like a big necklace, she breaks it in half to use as daggers, and she tries to help Mark. Then we have Anton, who gets ready to attack Layla, but Mark reaches her first and throws a load of stuff at Anton as he rides away, seemingly getting weapons in the back and riding off into the darkness. Seemingly not dead, but it's kind of hard to say if this character will come back. I mean, maybe they'll come back in this season, but like obviously with the unfortunate passing of Gaspard Ulliel, probably a character that isn't going to return much anyway, and I don't think there's a need for them, really. Like, it's not, I'll be honest, it's not the most exciting character anyway. But either way, they have their fragments from the sarcophagus to try to figure out where the tomb is. It has basically the constellations, and they hope that by putting them together, they'll be able to figure out where it is based on the position of the stars. But of course, they rightly point out the stars are not where they were on that night, centuries ago. But they find out that one person who could turn back the night sky would be Khonshu, because he remembers what it looked like that night. I also should say there's a cool moment here where we start as Mark. Mark obviously can't figure it out. Steven's the expert here, and Steven kind of says, like, let me do this, not you. And as much as he's reluctant, he does let him change. And we get an interesting shot where it's like a continuous shot of Oscar Isaac changing from one persona to the other. And it's great seeing him in working like that. That subtle change in his performance was very enjoyable to see. But he turns back the night sky. Of course, and in some foreshadowing beforehand, they said, yeah, if you mess with the night sky again, you're going to get turned into stone. And he does. He starts getting turned into stone. The god Khonshu does. And as that's happening, the locations match. Layla is able to find out where the tomb is. Of course, that does mean that Steven and Mark now no longer have Khonshu by their side, meaning they no longer have access to the Moon Knight suit or the Mr. Knight persona. But they're on their own, essentially. And we see his stone statue in the Pyramid of Giza, again, where we were earlier. And Harrow walks in and he's told that apparently the god can still hear him. And he says, very villainously, he basically says, like, I know one of my sins is enjoying the pain you made me dish out as the fist of vengeance or whatever. And he says that because of that, he knows the power of healing. But he also says, and isn't this a bitch? He says, he said basically the torment you caused me created me, and this victory is because of you, which is really rubbing salt in the wound, Harrow. Damn. And that was episode 3. As I said, I know it was last week, so I did kind of an abridged run through, I guess. The big questions out of this are actually teased and answered in the next episode, because the questions I had here was, did Mark kill Layla's father? It sure seems like it, and we get a more conclusive answer to that later on. We also have Midnight Man. Could he return? I kind of addressed that. And then the whole Jake Lockley thing. Who killed those men? It seems like it's probably Jake, but we get a few answers to this, so we'll come in now to episode 4, which was titled The Tomb. So we're out in the desert. This literally picks up from where we left off. Stephen is passed out in the desert, having exerted a massive amount of power, or exercised amount of power, turning back the night sky with Khonshu. And Layla is kind of hiding in the back of a truck as these men come by, and they're in their car to investigate. They have a turret mounted on the back. Layla draws them away by igniting a flare, and as she's hiding around, she throws a flare into the back of the vehicle, which has guns and ammunition, and the ammunition sets off, and they're kind of done for. I guess they're seemingly killed, and she's managed to save herself and Stephen, which, yeah, it was a nice little moment for her. Nice bit of action here, and I do think now that the basics of the character of Mark and Khonshu have been established, it's nice to get a bit more characterization for her, and it does feel like we definitely got that in this episode. But as that's going on, they now make their way to the tomb, and she insists that they're going to need Mark for this. But Steven says he and Mark made a deal, which they did, that when he's done with Khonshu, he would disappear for good. But Mark is like, well, look, we didn't expect it under this deal, and if you're going to get yourself killed, it shouldn't sit. We shouldn't have that deal if that's what the result is going to be. But she's also very annoyed, Layla, where she's like, you made this deal that I'll never get to see Mark again without even saying it to me. Which, yeah, it kind of messed up, but it is an interesting wrinkle in this, of the personas kind of trying to interact with each other. We also have a character who really only knows one persona and is still getting to know the other one. So that's kind of an interesting wrinkle to the usual, I guess, a love triangle. Do we call it love triangle when it's two people who have separate identities? I'm not sure. But as this is all going on, Mark is begging for control of the body back. But he also says that if he does that, Mark will probably try to be a lone wolf about it. They leave the car and proceed the rest of the way to the tomb on foot. Harrow and his forces, by the way, are already there now. They've set up camp and they start exploring the tents. Mark tells Stephen to give him the body back as they're going through the tents, that he's in over his head, but Mark has done this before. Stephen points out, interestingly, and it's nice to see Stephen kind of coming into his own and fighting back a bit. He says that basically it's the same body. You know, I have muscle memory on that. I've done it too, technically. And he says he's also not alone. He has Layla. And Mark kind of teases and torments him. He's like, "Oh, you like Layla, do you?" And it's kind of funny for him to be like, "Keep your hands off our wife." So yeah, he's like, it really teases that Stephen has having feelings for Layla. And not long after that, they actually share a kiss, which was well acted, very minorly, but it kind of felt like there was a little bit of discomfort and kind of uncertainty about the kiss, even though it was subtle. But yeah, again, Layla's falling for Stephen for his honesty, which is something Mark clearly doesn't have. And as they do this, they abseil into the tomb, and seemingly Mark takes control of the arm and punches Stephen in the face. Nice bit of comedy again. But they're now inside the tomb, and Layla writes IE in the sand as a tribute to her father, who she says would have loved this, and they go into the tomb deeper. There's a very strange structure to this tomb, and they note that it looks like the Eye of Horus, which they draw out for the uninitiated, and that they say it's a royal symbol for protection in the afterlife. Apparently, again, sometimes I'm like, I don't know, is that true or they just need it to be true for the story? But either way, they basically say from that Amit'S last avatar was a pharaoh then. And they go through what the Eye of Horus means. Again, this is why Stephen is handy. And it is nice to see that both personalities have their benefits for these kind of situations. And man, it's lucky that that Stephen works in an Egyptian section of a museum instead of being a philanthropist like he's in the comics, because it really comes in handy in this show. But he goes through basically the parts of the eye, and he's like, this is, they represent the senses, this would represent this sense. And he points at a part that would represent the tongue. He says, hey, the avatar would be Amit's voice, so it should probably go there. As they get there, there's seemingly fresh blood from a sacrifice in the tomb. And they also hear gunshots, but they're not aimed at them. This is kind of one of the strange parts of the episode. Tonally, it felt very different or unusual. I don't know if it fit entirely, but it was like a mysterious man or creature that drags a near unconscious man and starts to kill the man on the altar, taking out his organs, it looks like, which is, again, violent and bloody. One of the things I said about the show is that it doesn't feel like it's living up to the promises we got of it. One was that it was kind of more violent and very horror focused. Something like moments like this were probably where it nearly capitalized on that. It was more horror-y. It was a bit more violent, but it still wasn't majorly violent, and it wasn't all that scary. I guess there's a slight horror thing because it is some undead monster seemingly. At first it looked quite blue, and I thought it might have been a Kang variant of Ramatut, but that is not true. It makes these creepy clicking noises like the monsters in The Last of Us. So this monster notices them and they run. Stephen seemingly manages to squish it, but it's too late because Layla and him have now split up. The direction Layla ran, she now faces a ravine, and she reaches the other side with... It's really strange that she went to the other side anyway, because I'm like, man, I hope you have a plan on the way back if you have to go back that way. But she gets to the other side, but as soon as she does, this is where we got a cool horror shot, actually, where she's like standing to her with her back to kind of a certain darkness, and we don't know how, is that a wall or what? Seemingly it's out of an alley. We see kind of the monster grab her and pull her into the darkness, and we were like, oh snap, that's the end of Layla. But she does they keep that focus, and she manages to come back out and fight it off, and falls into a ravine, battling the monster, but thankfully she's grabbed onto the ledge and survives and pulls herself up. But she goes from one monster to another. As she looks to the other side of the ravine, we see Harrow conveniently just standing there looking over at her. Meanwhile, Stephen's path has been a bit nicer. It brought him straight to the tomb. He's had it easy, hasn't he? Seemingly he's also the first to reach it. He notices the symbols on the sarcophagus, as Macedonian, though. And he tries to think who it could be. And this is, in fact, the lost temple of Alexander the Great. Which is great because he keeps calling him Mr. the Great, which I liked. That was fun. Nice. It's nice to kind of see a bit of history and archaeology brought into this a bit more. That was kind of interesting, I thought. Very kind of Indiana Jonesy, I guess, which the show sometimes does, but hasn't to a massive degree yet. But it kind of feels like they lent into it a little bit here. But as this is all happening, as he's having a grand old time, Harrow is speaking to Layla, and he talks about her father, who he says is one of Egypt's most unique archaeologists, and saying he'd be proud that she was the first one to confirm his theory that Egyptian gods walk among us. He also tells her that Mark is in unbelievable agony and that his scales, the ones he has on his cane, confirm it. Stephen, at this point, opens the sarcophagus but finds the Ushabti of Amit'S missing. That was the word I was trying to think of a minute ago. That's what the stone statues are called. Thinking it would be somewhere that an average grave robber wouldn't look, he says, well, Alexander would be the voice of Amit, so maybe it's down his throat. And he just really disrespectful to Alexander the Great. And this is why I'm like, well, it's nice that he brought in a historical figure, because you totally disrespected it. And I don't think the people of Greece are going to be very happy, because he tears off the mummified bandages, breaks off his jaw, and starts digging to try to find the Ushabti. Harrow, at this point, is still talking to Layla, and he tells her that Mark is not telling her the truth, and that says that her father was killed by mercenaries, and that Mark was one of them, which Layla is kind of in disbelief about, but also quite upset about. Stephen has now found the Ushabti in the throat of Alexander the Great, and while he's celebrating, Layla comes in to confront him about what happened to her father, which she's like, I want to talk to Mark. I don't want to talk to you, Stephen, whatever, shut up. So yeah, she's very angry. Mark makes his presence known, and he's trying to tell her, like, look, we need to go. We can talk about this after. We need to go. Which probably was the right call, to be honest. Not the time to have this conversation. But Layla refuses until he tells her what happened. And he says he didn't kill him, but he was there. His partner got greedy and executed everyone at the dig site. The same man shot Mark and left him for dead, and he should have died. This seemingly is the mention of Bushman. We talked about him a lot, one of Moon Knight's best known foes. He kills Layla's father in the comics, so, well, it's not Layla in the comics, but it would seemingly be the implication that it's him. Again, a character they said isn't going to necessarily show up. Which, if they ever did a season 2, I guess they could put it in. I kind of understand why they didn't put him in, though. It sort of feels like if you did that, you had to really change the focus of who the villain was, or else it'd be overcrowded with villains. So I'm kind of fine with it. But yeah, that's what happens. That basically, he's saying, like, I was there, but I didn't kill him. And the same person who killed your father shot me and left me for dead. So trust me, I feel bad. I'm as much a victim as you, I guess. He's playing as a victim card here. But as that's happening, someone else approaches the tomb, and of course it is Harrow. And Mark tells Layla to run. He grabs an axe from Alexander the Great's tomb, and he's ready to defend himself as Harrow's men walk in. He speaks to Mark about the freedom he must now feel that Khonshu is gone, telling him that he has an important decision to make. Seemingly it was the wrong one. Thinking back to, Kung Pao, where it's like, I have one chance, dodge and fight, or get hit by whatever. It should have gone with A, because Mark proceeds to attack the men and then gets shot twice in the chest by Harrow. Nice to see Harrow get his actual hands dirty violently. Kind of, if there was ever any facade that he was kind of not as villainous as you might think, here it was very blunt. Yeah, he's the bad guy, in case you were actually like, hey, he makes a solid reason and a solid point. He falls twice, he's shot twice, and he falls back into the shallow water surrounding the sarcophagus. Ooh, tomb water, ugh. And then the episode ends. Not really. Because this is what everyone's going to be talking about. This is, as far as I know, when the episodes were sent out to critics, this was the last episode they got. And the big tease the whole time was, this is the episode that's going to change everything. And yeah, maybe. Because it feels like this is where they went full Legion. Because what we get next, it seems like he has some sort of outer body experience at first. We're seeing this kind of pantomime adventure film with some kind of a knockoff Indiana Jones kind of short round kind of vibe. with the Doctor being referred to as Stephen Grant. We later find out this film is called Tomb Buster. Terrible name. But then we see that that's actually just a film playing on a TV. And as they zoom out, you're like, oh, this room is incredibly white. Actually, everything is white. Oh no. Yes, we're seemingly in some form of mental care facility, mental asylum. I'm not sure what the correct term is nowadays, but they're handing out medication. Interesting here for a number of reasons is everyone pretty much that we see in the show. I've been a few people, I believe Bernard Crowley was there. I think his boss from the museum was there. Seemingly everyone that we see in the show is in this asylum, feeding into his delusions, seemingly. I will also see a few other kind of Easter eggs. A woman is drawing a head, and the head looks like Khonshu. We also see the goldfish that we saw in the first episode. And also, Layla is there. Layla apparently is pretty snaky. Maybe this is speaking to Mark's psyche, but Mark is kind of basically almost comatose in a wheelchair while they're playing bingo, and she knows he has bingo, and she's like, I'll take that off you, and I'll help. And then she's just like, I got bingo! So yeah, maybe that's what really Mark thinks of Layla, that she's just out to take whatever he gets. And yeah, we have then the person who played a police officer in the first episode, was it? Or was it the second episode? I think it was the second episode. Approaches Mark. He's seemingly an orderly, and he's like, I put you in your favourite spot, and the favourite spot is looking out the window, but the window is very reflective, so he sees, what would, again, have a connection to his possible fantasy world where he's looking at his reflection, and one is Stephen and one is Mark. And yeah, that's what's going on. It should also be mentioned his foot is tethered to the chair, like it was tethered to the bed in the first episode, and he has a figure in his hand, kind of an action figure that looks like Moon Knight. So these are all feeding into a possible delusion. We kind of dig into this a bit more in a sec, about whether it is a delusion or not. We hear then the voice of Harrow, but we see that Harrow is in fact a psychologist speaking to Mark and recognizing that he is having trouble differentiating in between what is real life and what is fake. A lot of the dialogue here and motives of the villain that we kind of heard come out of Harrow's mouth, he says, I think is that the villain in the film Tomb Buster's head, he said he likes that villain, for example. And we see all these other kind of hints about that this room could tie into Mark's delusions, which is, the kind of, I think the kind of clothes that Harrow are wearing, there's someone else seemingly wearing something like it at some point. We see a cane in the room. We see plenty of other things in the room that just kind of feed that idea. There's pictures that would have been that room in Germany, was it, when we saw in the first episode? Like all these things that basically would give a hint to what, is what we've experienced the last 3 episodes, what would inform it if this was in fact fake. Mark even says everything he sees reminds him of his past, of Stephen, for example. So there is, again, 2 identities here that they're aware of. Harrow says anytime he asks him a direct question, Mark gets overwhelmed, hence why he is sedated. And him being sedated is kind of a big thing. And Harrow says something very much in keeping with his villainous personas, I can't help you if you don't help yourself. At the mention of this kind of direct question, Mark gets up out of the wheelchair, stumbles to the floor because he's sedated, he's kind of drooling and falling. He goes up to the office door, smashes the glass. 2 orderlies try to stop him. He attacks them and starts to run. And again, we see more things that feed his delusion along the way. He hides in one of the rooms, and this room has a sarcophagus that is rattling, which he opens, and inside is Stephen, who he leaves out. And Stephen and Mark, now both seemingly in a physical form, they actually embrace and hug each other. There's no reflection here. They're both physical bodies in this reality, seemingly. As they're moving to escape, though, we get another tease at Jake Lockley. We see a room that has another sarcophagus where it's knocking, trying to get out. So yeah, third persona seemingly pretty much confirmed. Again, I would assume he's going to make an appearance of all this teasing. It would be very strange if it wasn't. But as they're going, they see a big booming figure that approaches them, and coming through the doors is a giant hippo god. And she says hi. They both scream, different screams as well, which is a nice touch. And the episode ends. What the fuck? Okay. How do we dig into that one? Okay, this is heavily inspired by Jeff Lemire's run on Moon Knight. The first issue of that run we kind of get a very brief intro to Moon Knight and Khonshu, and then he's in an asylum, wondering if all this stuff was ever real. And I guess that's sort of the question that people are walking away with now, because really everything else in the episode kind of became secondary. I mean, we got an answer to he was there at the very least when her father was killed. Everything else now is up in the air and it's a question. So the question is everything we watched fake? No, surely not. I mean, if it was, it's a good twist, but people would be really pissed off if you basically just spent 2/3 of your show being like, that doesn't matter actually. So seemingly it's just possibly, it could be that he's, having an out-of-body experience in his death throes. What is more interesting here is who that hippo is. That hippo is the god Taweret, who is a goddess often associated with childbirth and child rearing. And I'm going to quote the great scholar Wikipedia here. Quite contrarily, she also took on the role of a funeral deity in this period, evidenced by the commonplace practice of placing hippopotami decorated with marsh. I didn't realize that was. Sorry, I was just never heard the plural of hippopotamus before. Hippopotami. Who says this is an education, huh? Decorated with marsh flora in tombs and temples. Some scholars believe that this practice demonstrates that hippopotamus goddesses facilitated the process of rebirth after death, just as they aided infants in early childbirth. These statues then assisted the deceased passing into the afterlife. So, the hippo, Taweret, is seemingly what's going to be instrumental in him being revived, being brought back from the dead. We also should point out that there was a kind of a hippo plushie in the gift shop where he worked. So there's also, evidence if they did go that route. But it does seem like he's going to be revived. I do think this is kind of the kick in the ass the show needed. I feel like something weird and interesting like this for me felt like the first time the show got me actively very, very interested. Now, I do think it's going to be all for nothing. Like, I do think by next episode it's going to be like, you're back in Egypt. It wasn't all a dream. And maybe he'll have some journey of self-discovery and the personas will work better together to defeat Harrow. I don't know. It is very interesting. I have to give a couple of shout-outs in this. I have to give the shout-out to the production design people because, man, looked amazing, this institution. And having all those touches, I feel like you could dig through those and get lots of them. It was just a stunning looking facility. Even the kind of architecture of the psychiatrist Harrow's room looked kind of like his compound. So it was really hats off to them. They did a fantastic job here. Oscar Isaac was great in this episode, even towards the end especially. And seeing them both interact, it's cool. You really do see how different those personas were in performances there. I think it really is a testament to him as an actor that they got someone who can play off those so well. And it's a tough one because as interesting as it is, it's interesting because of the possibilities it poses, but will likely not follow. You know what I mean? Like, if they basically threw out the whole thing that we established at this point and this was all a delusion, that would be interesting. I'd like to see where they would go with that trail of thought, but they're not going to do that surely, because then it means everything we saw up to this point was for nothing. And, then there is no Moon Knight. Which I'm assuming they want to at least leave the possibility that Moon Knight could be in the MCU going forward. But it was a great twist. And I should say, like, calling it a twist, like, it probably deserves better than that, because a twist normally kind of comes at the end. We got about 10 minutes here to kind of live in that delusion. And I think, again, the show had become a little bit monotonous. Like I said before, it does feel like every episode is like, we need to find this, let's go to Egypt. We need to find this in Egypt. We need to find this. So they needed something to break it up a bit. And I would say next week's episode is probably the most I've been interested in the show so far. I can't imagine that it's going to live up to that expectation. I do think it's going to bring us back to the status quo before a big action finale. Purple lights in the sky coming out of a pyramid. I joke, I'm pretty sure that was in a trailer as well. But it is an interesting way of approaching the show, and I would have loved to have seen more things like that peppered throughout maybe. It does seem very like Legion, though. And I didn't love Legion, if I'm totally honest. I thought it had potential. I like the idea of it more than the execution of it. But yeah, that is Moon Knight. That was episode 3, the friendly type, and episode 4, the Tomb. There will be episodes weekly going forward. Sorry I missed episode 3. Sorry if this double bill made this video long. Hopefully you skipped around to whatever suited you. Either way, that is the show this week. I have been your cult leader, Tompat. I hope you'll come back for further discussions on Moon Knight. I hope you'll stick around on this channel to subscribe, because we are doing a lot more Marvel stuff. I just announced Marvel Rewatcher, the Multiverse of Badness, where we're going to review some terrible old Marvel stuff. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Either way, I've been your cult leader, Tompat. Thank you for watching this video. Please come back next week, because remember, I'll be watching. Take care.